Hello and welcome to the Japan Archives, a podcast where we'll be delving into the histories and mythologies from Japan's long history. I'm your host, Thomas.
And I'm your co-host, Heather. We'll also be reading a poem for you every week and giving a little history about the poet who wrote it. Ikimashou!
Hey guys, welcome back to the Japan Archives, episode 40 now. Like we said, we wanted to do the folklore of cats this week. Heather is trying to sign to me over the video. What's happening? Oh, you're drawing cat ears while I talk. I see. Okay. That took me a while. I'm sorry.
It took a while to get my hands in the proper positioning because I was like, wait a minute, that's not cat-like. That's cat-like.
So how are you doing anyway, Heather?
I'm having a good week, except today decided to be summertime.
Yeah, it suddenly got super hot today.
There's like a switch flipped this week. I don't know what happened, but it's, doing pretty all right, I think pretty good week. How about yourself?
It's been a good week. I've just been chilling with some computer games whilst also doing this research. It's been nice and relaxing and visited my friend New Kittens. You've seen the pictures. So it's almost fate that we were doing cats this week.
Do we have cats on the brain, perhaps? Were we inspired?
I think so. We can blame her for getting those kittens and inspiring us to do it.
Thank her for getting those kittens. I mean, they're not for us, but we get to see the pictures.
But they are also for us. So.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, dear friend, for getting the cats.
So jumping into it then, what do you already know story-wise about cats or anything in Japan? Do you know much?
A little here and there. Not as much as I would like to know. I know cats are a big thing here historically and artistically, liturgical? What's the right word? Not literally, but literaturely.
Let's make that a word if it's not already.
It's getting hot. The thinking is harder when it's hot. So a little. I don't have any specifics at the moment because all I can think about is mostly Ghibli things at the moment. Ghibli just springs to mind, which is not all of Japanese history.
Very true. Well, I guess I'll jump into it then. So to start off, for Japan, supernatural cats can fall into the term of yokai. Understandably, they can be mysterious creatures, but they can also be classed as several different things. So we have the term henge, which can be used for creatures which are also shapeshifters, but we can even class most of these supernatural cats as kaibyo.
Now you mentioned cats and yokai. I'm going to go back a little bit in time here. When I was ALT, and Yokai Watch was very popular, and there was one of the main characters was a cat.
That is true. The red cat.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a supernatural cat? Did it have powers?
I believe it did. I've not actually watched Yokai Watch. I just talked to my students about it, and they were very excited. And I wish I had been able to understand more what they were talking about it and had watched it. But they always loved Yokai Watch. They'd always talk. The younger ones would talk about Yokai Watch.
That's cute.
Mm-hmm.
For today's episode, I'm not going to touch on the history of Hello Kitty. She deserves something for herself. She's quite a big thing in Japan, and that's just like a black hole of stuff that will distract us for days and days.
Because we got Hello Kitty, but you also, I read through your notes, I don't see anything about Doraemon either.
Oh, of course. No, I hadn't even considered Doraemon. But we are going to look into some cat folk tales, and we're definitely going to talk about the Lucky Cat, which I'm sure everyone recognizes, the little cat that waves at you. But a first question, Heather, for you. Have you ever come across a Japanese family name with the kanji for a cat in it?
Do you know what? I think I have seen that before, but I don't remember the reading. I think so, because I would look and go, there's cat. Why is there cat?
And that was the family name.
I think so. I mean, I've encountered the cat kanji several times, but not being that prolific. proficient. Wow, vocabulary is hard today. Being proficient in reading a lot of Japanese kanji. I know I've seen it somewhere, but when or where? Maybe it was in a newspaper article or in like some author or something. But I swear I've seen it. I think I've seen it before.
Well, you kind of ruined what I was going to say then.
Well, then I say
Because
no. I've
no,
never
no,
seen it
no,
before.
it's fine. It's interesting that you say that. The book that I came across that briefly mentioned this idea said that according to superstitions at least, there is no family name in Japan which uses the kanji for cat due to its supernatural and mysterious and at times scary connotations it's had throughout history. So it's interesting that you say you have found one.
Well, to be fair, how many kanjis look like other kanjis? And I've probably thought it was cat, and it probably wasn't cat because there's a lot of kanjis that look like other kanjis.
That could also be true, for sure. So let's dive into the world of cat. We've touched before briefly on cats when we had our first bonus episode, the one about Shipotaro, the dog, and how he dealt with the cat god, I think it was in the
Oh,
end.
yeah.
Let's start by quickly looking then at the practice that you see a lot in Japan, which I think is quite an unfortunate practice that still exists. And it's the one where they cut off the cat's tail in Japan and make it very, very short. It does seem to have its origins in the superstitious past, from a time when cats were these strange and supernatural creatures.
The cutting of tails of animals is done in a few cultures. I think even like here, the AKC breeds they cut the tails for specific breeds of dogs for dog shows. So while I agree with you, the practice is, I don't agree with it either. I don't like it at all. It's something that's done in a lot of different cultures. So just, yeah, not a good thing.
Yeah. But if we want to find one of the potential reasons about why it still might be done today, we can turn our attention to Lafcadio Hearn and one of his many writings from his time in Japan.
So who's Lafcadio Hearn?
Lafcadio Hearn, we briefly mentioned him before. Lafcadio Hearn was a writer who actually was best known at the time for his books about Japan. He was one of the first Westerners to actually write about Japanese culture and history, and he collected a lot of legends and ghost stories about Japan. One of his more famous books was known as Kwaidan, and he actually as well took up for himself a Japanese name of Koizumi Yakumo. But yeah, like I said, he's mostly known for his writings about Japan. All of his writings and all of his letters that he wrote over his lifetime were eventually compiled into two large volumes of work in 1906 by Elizabeth Bisland, and they were published. And one of his letters does talk about how certain cats, such as the Izumo cat, are actually born with rather long tails. Now, looking into the mysticism surrounding these animals, it was thought that should they be able to keep their long tails, then they would actually grow up and be able to turn, for instance, into a creature known as the Nekomata, which we will talk about soon. Assuming perhaps that the legends surrounding supernatural cats have lasted into modern day Japan, this could be one of the superstitious reasons of why they still do it, because they don't wish their cats to turn into these supernatural forms. So when do you think cats arrived in Japan, Heather?
Do you know, that is a really good question because I've never even thought of it. Like honestly, when like domesticated cats, not like big cats, right?
Yeah, domesticated cats.
I don't have a guess. Please enlighten me.
Cats, well, at least the domesticated kind of cats that we know today, they weren't native to Japan. There are strange tales of potentially other types of cats that lived in Japan, such as the Yamaneko or the mountain cat, said to have been as big as cougars and striped like tigers. But these creatures apparently went extinct sometime before 300 BC, and there's relatively little known about their existence. But the cats that we know, the cats that we have as house pets, there's evidence going all the way back to the 3rd century BCE.
Okay, that's farther than I would have assumed. I would have thought more recent than that. Wow.
So it's quite an old start for cats, and we have found their remains from grave sites such as Karakami in Iki. Though at the time they were brought to Japan in very low numbers, and there wasn't a viable population for them to breed and survive, so these cats were likely traded in as curiosities and nothing more, prized by their owners, and eventually buried alongside them.
Do they know what country that they were brought from? I'm assuming possibly maybe from China, by way of China, or do you know if it was a different country?
The theories are, like you said, perhaps China originally, or even through various trades originating all the way in Egypt, as
Ah,
they were
okay.
always historically known for their cats.
Yes. Oh, okay.
So, yes, these original cats probably didn't last, and they did unfortunately die out. The population wasn't viable, and it's likely that it wasn't until 552 AD, so quite a jump in years, that cats returned to Japan again. When Buddhism was introduced into Japan and there was a lot of trade, it was likely cats came along with them. And it's around this time that we start to have our first records that talk about cats. However, if we want to turn our attention to the first definitive record of a cat, we can go to a specific day in 889 AD, which is March 11th. And we have a diary entry from this day, from a diary known as the Kampyo Gyoki, which was the diary of the Emperor of Japan at the time, the Emperor Uda. And he wrote the following about his own cat. I wish to express my joy of the cat. The color of the fur is peerless. None could find the words to describe it. I affixed a bow about its neck, but it did not remain for long. In rebellion, it narrows its eyes and extends its needles. When it lies down, it curls into a ball like a coin. You cannot see its feet. When it stands, its cry expresses profound loneliness, like a black dragon floating above the clouds. Its color allows it to disappear at night. I am convinced it is superior to all other cats. So we can see that cats all the way back then were loved by even the highest members of Japanese society. And I do kind of enjoy the idea of the Emperor of Japan putting a little bow on his cat.
I find it very interesting too that apparently cat memes are just a continuation in a very long history of admiring cats.
I think, yeah, cats have been admired for so long. They've definitely persisted. So we have our records of cats, but the actual kanji used for cat, it does come from the Asuka period, which was between 538 to 710 AD. So around, Emperor Uda did reign during this time. And this kanji first appears in the word known as the Mikeneko, or the three-colored furry beast. And I suppose we could class that potentially as our first supernatural cat.
So I guess like calico, perhaps. Maybe calico colored.
Oh, it's interesting you say that, so bear with me.
Ooh.
Now, the Mikeneko in its original form was said to have been a very dangerous beast with fiery eyes and incredibly intelligent, but also very vengeful to those who would betray it. Funnily enough, that's all we really know about this strange cat-like furry creature, but if you are in Japan, you may have heard the term Mikeneko before, like you've just said, and it is now used for the term for calico cats. So this creature has turned from a ferocious and scary creature to the modern day calico cat, which is seen as rather lucky. So it has undergone quite the change throughout the centuries.
I have a calico cat fact.
I'm listening.
Calico cats are generally female.
So it's rare for a male calico.
Yeah, about 1 out of every 3,000 calico cats is male. It is because of the gene that controls orange fur is on the X chromosome. But in males, orange is usually shown as a striped or tabby pattern. So the multiple colors, like it's more rare to have a male calico.
Well, that's pretty cool, actually. So we talked about the Mikeneko, we talked about the calico cats. So I want to move on to our first, well, I wouldn't say first, as our second supernatural cat for the day, which was called the Nekomata, or the forked cat. This cat has been portrayed rather well throughout history, but in various ways. We can see portrayals of it by Toriyama Sekien, who we have mentioned before. He had his large yokai encyclopedias that he created, and illustrated all the different creatures. His portrayal shows 3 different cats in various stages of turning into a Nekomata. We can also find this creature portrayed in other documents known as the Hyakai Zukan or the Bakemono no E, where they are shown actually wearing a geisha's robe and playing the shamisen. Now, this shamisen depiction is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, as we've said before, that shamisen are traditionally made of cat's skin.
Kind of like in American football, if you had a pig carrying a football to play.
Yeah, I suppose it is actually, yeah. So what exactly is a Nekomata? Well, legends say that when a cat should reach a certain age, they would gain the ability to walk on its hind legs, as well as learn to talk and have a tail which splits into 2. So in regards to its origins, how far back can we actually trace this cat? We first find them mentioned in a diary called the Meigetsuki, or Diary of the Clear Moon, by Fujiwara Teika, who was actually our poet from episode 15.
Oh,
And he wrote on August 8th, 1233, that a Nekomata came from the mountains and ate multiple people. I'm not quite sure how the creature became associated with eating human flesh, but this is definitely an idea that multiple people had at the time, because we can also find in the book known as the Essays in Idleness, which was written around the same time. It also states that deep in the mountains there lives the Nekomata. It is said to feed on humans. So, Heather, if you're ever in the mountains and you see a standing cat, which happens to have 2 different tails, I think it would be rather best to steer clear, just in case he is hungry at the time. But what I find is a little bit more interesting about this creature is that during their original accounts, they were seen as a separate breed of cat to the domestic cat. And it wasn't until the Edo period that they kind of merged, and it was thought that domesticated cats, so your pet cat, would eventually grow and turn into the Nekomata. So they went from being separate to being merged. Over time as well, these cats, they underwent various changes in their size. In 1685, they were described as being as large as a boar. By 1775, they had become as big as panthers. And by 1809, they had even become described as over 6 foot in length. And that just goes to show how legends can change over time, which I think is quite interesting.
if I saw a 6 foot tall cat on 2 legs with forked tails,
6 foot long. Oh, I guess it would be 6 foot tall if it stood on its legs.
no, it'd be taller if it was 6 foot long, because then it would you
Oh, it'd
have
be
to
like
count.
7 foot. Yeah.
Depends on how long the legs were. Like an equation of how tall would a 6 foot long cat be standing on its hind legs?
Sounds like one of those silly math problems you get as a kid. Like, Sue goes into the supermarket and buys 16 watermelons. Like, no one does that. These questions are stupid.
Heather and Thomas go into the mountains and they encounter Nekomata. He's 6 feet long, but how tall is he when he stands on his hind legs?
It doesn't even sound like a made up question. I would read that on a math test and just be like, yep, that makes sense. Let me try and figure out the equation. Anyway, back on track. One last thing about this creature. Now, this thing, I can't quite remember where I read it, but I definitely didn't imagine it. So there is that. And it's definitely something to think about for the Edo period and how cats were viewed. During this time, they used a lot of lamps in their homes, which were fish oil based. And obviously, fish oil, a cat would have found this a very tasty treat. So there is the potential theory that people would have seen the outline of their cat through the shoji paper doors, and they would have seen it standing on its hind legs as it tried to reach up to the lamp to dine from the fish lamp. And so people think that this became a belief that my cat was standing on its hind legs, it's undergoing changes, and then it became merged potentially with the Nekomata.
Kind of how like sailors perhaps saw maybe seals. They would see the tails of was it maybe seals or some other
Or like the
marine
manatee.
Yes, and then it's like came up with mermaids. So yeah, because the lamps probably would have been fish oil or whale oil, I would imagine at the time. Since I didn't even think about that. Well, it's no wonder. It's no wonder Japan and cats go together why there's so many cats, because there's so much fishing culture here. It's like a cat paradise.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. So I want to end with a quick Nekomata tale from 1660 before we move on to the next cat. Now, this story goes as follows. There was once a monk from the temple of Gyoganji who wandered around singing the praises of the Buddha, and he told me this tale. One night I was out in the mountains singing until I decided to return home. When I reached a brook, I searched for a safe place to cross, and that is when the Nekomata came out to strike. It grabbed my leg, climbed up to my neck, and sunk in its teeth. I fell into the brook, crying for help. Unluckily, someone heard me and rushed to find me. What is going on? They cried. They pulled me from the creek. My possessions and money had been washed away. Having saved me, I and everyone else then returned home.
So I guess he was quite lucky that he was not consumed, but merely sampled.
That's true. He did manage to get out alive.
Why did he go? Like, I'm kind of interested that he went to bit on the neck, like vampire cat.
There is a folktale about a vampire cat, and I had to cut it from today. There was far too much to talk about for a cat. So
There's a vampire
this is
cat.
definitely
Oh.
this is going to be part 1 of cat folktales and folklore. We were going to have to do a part 2 for sure, and I will do the vampire cat for you next time, I promise.
Yes, vampire cat. Thank you. Oh my gosh, that's exciting.
Now, the third thing I want to look at today is known as the Neko Musume, or the cat daughter. I think it's safe to say this is a trope which is rather popular in anime these days. A lot of female characters are part human, part cat. And they have their cute little cat ears and at times a tail.
And the little tooth. They always have the little snaggle tooth, but just one,
A
not
little
two.
pointy tooth.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the origins of these beings are less than happy. And I don't like to use this term, but just to get an immediate image across to people, they can find their origins in places which we would have once called freak shows or carnivals.
Historical context. Historical
Yes,
context.
exactly. Now, I'm not going to be using that term again. It was just to give you an idea. Now, these carnivals were of extraordinary people, if not outright forgeries, to entice people into spending money. In Japan, they made fake yokai like kappa and oni. They would make fake skulls of dead oni to include in their shows. And in Japan, these carnivals were known as misemono. These shows were often hurriedly produced and crude, and what I found surprising, they were actually times a way to benefit and raise funds for shrines and temples in Japan. We can trace them back to the Edo period, but it's possible they were around earlier than this. And I found out that the most famous of all the carnivals and the carnival people, I guess from around these times, was the American P.T. Barnum, who we all know, especially from the film The Greatest Showman. And in fact, his famous Fiji mermaid was created at a Japanese misemono and found its way all the way into one of his shows.
Ah.
However, we're here to talk about the Neko Musume. She was exhibited, we know, in the Asakusa district of Edo at the time, and she reached her height in popularity around 1769. It was said she was exactly how a cat-human hybrid would appear. And unfortunately, we have no pictures of her, so leave that to your own imagination. But whether this was unfortunately from some kind of birth defect or even through the use of clever prosthetics, we will never know. And she had all but faded from fame by the 1780s as misemono started to fall into decline. But this isn't quite the end for this particular kind of cat. They resurfaced again in 1800 with tales surfacing about this creature once more. One tale comes from the Ashu no Kijo and says that there was once a merchant who had a daughter, and his daughter had a rough tongue and a fondness for licking things. Due to this, the nature of her parentage only came into question, and eventually this girl was given the name of Neko Musume. The second tale comes from something known as the Ansei-zaki, and this was a collection of stories from 1852 which were actually written as factual at the time. The story says that in Tokyo there was a girl once named Matsu. Since childhood, she had had a fondness for dragging discarded heads and guts from fish from the garbage before eating them. She was nimble and would often trap mice and rats to eat. Due to this, she gained many names, such as Nekokozo, the cat child, or Nekobozu, the cat priest. Her nature was strange to others, some thinking that the essence of a cat had mingled with hers as a baby, leading to how she was today. Her mother prayed and summoned doctors to try and see if she could take the cat out of her child. She even beat her poor daughter, but none of these things actually worked. In the end, in desperation perhaps, she shaved her daughter's head and sent her to be a nun. But even that did not work. Still, her cat-like behavior continued, and she was expelled from the nunnery. Matsu was then bullied by many other children in the area. They even chased her, but as she was nimble, she could always get away by climbing up and running over rooftops. And in the end, she became respected by other adults who saw her as a useful item for their rat problems. And so her mother decided to rent out her own child. Matsu would then clamber underneath other people's homes and would feast on the rats that lived there. And that is the strange tales of the Neko Musume. The second story is definitely, I wouldn't say gruesome, but I would say a little saddening. Like her mum decided the best use for her daughter was to rent her out for people to basically use.
I'm trying to think of an appropriate response to.
There might not be one.
There might not. No, and I definitely much different than how the half cat girls are usually portrayed today. I'm glad they didn't bring that into. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that is. I don't think I've got a. I don't think I have a good response.
I think that's fair enough. Let's move on to the next cat then.
Yeah. Let's. What else did you brought? What else have you got for me?
So I'm going to do one more cat, probably today. Like I said, there were so many that I could have done. There's also others such as the Kasha, the Bakeneko, the Gotoku Neko, Doraemon, like you mentioned earlier. But I didn't want to go overboard. We'll easily do a part 2 for this. So I wanted to end, like I said, on something rather familiar to most people. The waving cat, also known as the lucky cat or the inviting cat, or, as it's known in Japanese, the Maneki Neko. First of all, Heather, did you know that it can come in various different colors?
I know there are different colors and that they have different meanings.
Yes, but do you know any of the meanings?
Now the meanings I do not know. Like maybe I've seen it on a mikuji. Like you can sometimes go to shrines and you get the different portions. You get different. That's one of the options is you'll get that and it means a certain thing, but it's on a little piece of paper. 'Cause I've done that before, but I think it was a daruma and not a Maneki Neko.
Yes, you are correct. There are different colors for different meanings. Red is used for relationship success and illness prevention. Black is for keeping evil at bay. Gold, naturally, for money. And there's even new colors coming out all the time. There is now green that you can get now for health, blue for academic success, and even pink for help in love. There are some that say a raised left hand on the cat will bring in money for you, but there are others that would say the complete opposite. So this is more of a personal preference thing or probably a locational specific on what the belief is surrounding the left or right hand. But what can we say of the origin for the Maneki Neko? It's a little bit contended. Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto all claim origins for this cat dating back to the Edo period, but the earliest made forms can be traced back to Tokyo or Edo in the Asakusa district. In their original form, they were a little different to today, however. Obviously, today they are more in various different kinds. You have plastic, you have metal, you have porcelain. They have their little necklace with a little bell on, or they can come with their koban, their large gold piece of money to bring you fortune and things like that. But originally, they were made just of fired clay with their little raised paw, but they did lack the modern flair of the cat. And these precursor cats actually went by a different name, the Marushime, meaning something close to affixing wealth and fortune to yourself. These precursor cats were actually portrayed in a woodblock print by Utagawa
Oh.
Hiroshige from 1851. He did a portrayal of the markets of Sensoji, which were filled with these cats at the time. And a year later, we find a tale of their origins actually being, well, maybe not born from this picture, but the origins of these cats, their origins can be found dating to a year later. The story says that there was once a woman who lived with her cats in the area. She was poor, and her rent was soon due. However, she did not have the money to pay, and so her cat came to her in her dreams, saying that the gods had not abandoned her in her time of need. All she needed to do was to take the clay from under her home and sculpt a cat, bake it to make a fine figurine, and then with it praise the Buddha. And if she did so, riches and fine cloth then come to her in kind.
Did they come to her?
I'm going to assume it did.
Hmm.
The story that, at least the version of the story I had on hand, does end the story there. But you can still find this tale told to this day in Asakusa at the Imado Shrine, who claim themselves as the birthplace of the Marushime. Sadly, though, they don't sell them. They only sell the modern day Maneki Neko.
Maybe they told the story that left it open ended, like riches and cloth will come to you. Well, did it come to her? You know, if you buy this Maneki Neko, you can find out. That's like an open ended selling technique.
It's definitely a good way to sell more cat. I do think it's a shame though that you can't buy the originals at the temple anymore. They only sell the modern versions. I would like, if I could, to get an original form, but there you go. So when did these original cats morph and change into this new form? When did they get their new style? When did they add the other attachment, the coins, the bibs that you can see on them? Interestingly, we don't know.
Oh.
All we know is that their popularity continued to increase from 1876 after a news article was written about them. So at some point in the forgotten pages of history, someone had redesigned these cats, and slowly the new form took off in popularity and replaced the Marushima. I was going to end it there, but I thought I'd end with this nice little addition about a modern day cat. This one comes from 1999, and I was wondering if you had ever heard of this cat, Heather, the cat called Tama.
I hadn't.
Okay, so this cat was born in 1999, and she grew up to be a station manager at a train station at Kichi Station in Wakayama Prefecture.
Oh, cute.
Now, she would often be brought to the train station by her owner, as her owner worked there at the time. And funnily enough, because of the cat's presence at the train station, their visitors and their tourists increased, which was quite good, as the station had actually almost closed due to a lack of funding. Sadly, the cat did die in 2015, but her job has lived on. The position of station manager is still there for a cat, and it has been passed down onto her successors, who were named Nitama, Suntamatama, and now Yontama, which literally mean second, third, and fourth Tama.
Oh.
So I wanted to end with that. I think it's kind of fascinating to see how cats had such sinister links throughout history potentially, but they've now become not only a symbol of prosperity and health and wealth, but also a tourist attraction. And there are my tales for you today.
Those are your cat tales for today.
There are my cat tales for today.
Oh, that was really cool. I didn't know about the origins of cats coming into Japan, and also all of the folk tales. There's so many more than I was aware of. And now that you've told a few tales, I'm starting to remember other things, but I think I will save that for the next episodes of Cats.
Okay. I did say I would give a book recommendation for today. This book is by Zach Davison, and his book is entitled Kaibyo, The Supernatural Cats of Japan. This was the most useful book I found on the cat legends. It did lead me to various other things, but if you want a good overview of the different supernatural cats of Japan, I would definitely recommend his book as a good starting point. He covers a lot more cats that we haven't covered today, which we will talk about in part 2. So there you go, my book recommendation for today. And I suppose that leads us into your segment, does it not?
Does indeed. So I have a poem for today, And full disclosure, I had a couple of things picked out at the beginning of the week, but then at the ninth hour, the professor said, "Oh, here, I have something for you," and gave me a different poem completely. So I'm quickly going to share with you because this is a new poet for me. It's a new poet for both of us. First of all, I'll tell you his name, which is Takashi Matsumoto, and he was born in 1906, so more modern poet. And he was born in Tokyo, and he was born into a family of No actors, so the No theater, which we will talk about someday. And so he actually started acting from the age of 8.
8?
8 years old, yes. So
Okay,
for
so a very young actor.
yeah, kabuki actors, no actors, if you're born into these families, you will be on stage at a very early age. Actually, even kabuki actors, I think some of them are like 4 or 5 years old. They'll be in some of the stage plays, and they start
That's
learning.
fascinating.
Yeah, they start learning from a really young age. He also had an interest in like Chinese literature and calligraphy and also English. And he liked rakugo, which is comic storytelling, which we will also touch at some point in the podcast. He became ill in 1921, and during this illness, he ran across a haiku magazine called the Hototogisu. So he then joined a haiku circle that was mostly no actors, and then started studying haiku under Takahama Kyoshi. When he was about 20, he decided to no longer be a no actor, and he had some health problems and decided to go into composing haiku. And unfortunately, he did die quite young. He died in 1956, and he was 50 years old. Now, he did during his lifetime, he had his own literary magazine called Fue, and he also wrote a novel about a no actor named Hoshio Kuro. And he also won a literary prize called the Yomiuri Literary Prize for his haiku. So even during his short lifetime, he was very prolific and did quite a few things. So the poem today I'm going to share with you is, like we said last week, it's about cats. So if you are ready, I will start the poem.
Okay.
Usumake, hitogirai nari, kotatsu neko.
Well, I definitely heard cat. I also heard kotatsu.
Mhm.
The only other I wrote down everything you said, but the only other word that I understood was hito, so person. So I have kotatsu, cat, and person.
Well, some of these phrases I had not encountered either. So I'll start at the beginning because you have kotatsu and neko, and you have the kanji. Actually, there's kanji for hito, but it's for the word hitogirai, which hitogirai means kind of like disdain. So kind of
Oh, okay.
usumake is kind of like as you are familiar with cats, you know how cats sometimes have that facial expression where their eyes are pretty much mostly closed, maybe not quite closed, but they're just almost closed. That's usumake.
Okay.
So the translation, which I got from the professor, and actually I helped to clean it up a little bit.
Oh, nice.
With squinted eyes, the cat says, "I don't want to talk with you," while on the kotatsu.
That's a lot of stuff in quite a short haiku.
So essentially, what I took from it, it's very much the essence of cat. Sometimes cats really don't don't always want to have a lot to do with people. Sometimes they're very, please leave me alone. I'm here. Let me sleep. Let me think. Let me rest. Especially while in a warm place. They're very comfortable and warm. Like, please don't bother me. Don't call me. And hitogirai, from the professor, he said this word can be said to be deep and philosophical, but because it's being said by a cat, it's actually got kind of a humorous interpretation to it.
Oh, I see.
With the translation I gave you, I'm going to say it one more time, and I want you in your mind's eye, I want you to picture a cat. It could be any cat you've had, cat you've interacted with. Usumaki hitogirai nari, kotatsu neko. Just picture that cat going, why are you bothering me?
You can definitely imagine it. Like you said, it's definitely something a cat would do. Yeah, especially if you've owned a cat, it's definitely more understandable. It's the quintessential essence of being a cat in haiku form. Well, thank you for the poem.
You are so very welcome. I quite enjoyed that one. It's simple, but it's got a little bit of complexity to it. The more you think about it, like, and very descriptive of a cat.
Well, I liked it for sure. So is that you done?
That's
then
me done.
For today?
If you have no other questions, I am going to go to my kotatsu and sit and wait.
No, nothing more from me today. I guess it's time for us to sign off as usual. Now, next week.
Did your cherry blossom book come in?
Of course it didn't.
Ah.
I'm still waiting. I don't know where it is. It's lost in the mail somewhere. So again, dear listeners, you will either have a cherry blossom episode, or if I'm honest right now, I'm not sure what our backup plan would be. We will have something of interest as usual. So yes, if it is not cherry blossoms, it will be a surprise for you all.
That sounds like a plan to me, of some sort.
It's the best we can do right now. But anyway, again, thank you all for tuning in this week. We hope you did enjoy the 2 bonus episodes. I know we certainly enjoyed studying them and researching them. And until next week, that is everything from me. So it's time for me to sign off. Mata ne.
皆さん気をつけて。またね。
If you've enjoyed the Japan archives, please consider checking out historyofjapan.co.uk, a database we are making on Japanese history. You can also find the show notes for all our episodes here. If you're on Instagram, you can follow my account over at nexus_travels, that's NEXUS_travels.
We also have a Facebook and Twitter page, which you can find at Japan Archives. If you're interested in little slices of life in Japan, be sure to check out my website over at heatheroveryonder.com. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, have anything you'd love to hear about, head on over to historyofjapan.co.uk and send us a message.
If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give us a rating and review over on iTunes. Thank you again for listening, guys. Until next time, bye.
Matane!